Okay.
All right, welcome back to the afternoon portion of our policy session. I'm going to turn it over to Gary.
Thank you, Chair Bernard. It is Tuesday, April 28th, 2020. All 5 commissioners are present. We are going to finish the issues list first, and then we'll get to our afternoon policy sessions. So while the staff are being brought into the session, I will start. Commissioners, you had a communication from 2 local hoteliers here in Clackamas County asking the commission to waive collection of the transient room tax for these 2 hotels. As you know, the transient room tax is paid for by the customer of the hotel when they stay in a hotel, and those fees are then by state ordinance passed on to, in our case, our Clackamas County Tourism and Cultural Affairs Department, or the Mount Hood Territory. As you know, most hotels have had no business, and the tax collection has stopped. It has stopped coming to Clackamas County as well. We've had to temporarily dismantle our tourism department and unfortunately lay off several staff. So clearly you can hear what I'm about to recommend. I'm recommending you do not waive this tax collection. These are paid for by the customers of a hotel, not the hotel themselves. And by state law, they must be passed on then to the appropriate tourism agency. Clackamas County is Clackamas County Tourism and Cultural Affairs. However, I'm bringing the request to you. Would you like to waive the TRT collection for the 2 hotels that have reached out to you?
No, I mean, they didn't pay it. They collected it on our behalf. That's like, I don't know.
I'm not even sure we can actually waive it due to the state. I thought state laws didn't give us the choice to waive it.
I don't think they do.
Anyway, the answer is no.
Okay. All right. Very good. Next, we'll move on to Trent Wilson, who is online. There's a request for a mental health support letter made by Representative Janelle Bynum. So I'll let Trent give you the details, please.
Thank you, Gary. Trent Wilson, Public and Government Affairs. Yes, Representative Bynum is seeking your support for a letter that she has already introduced to the governor's office and others that proposes policy solutions to address barriers to enter the mental health field and provide increased mental health services to Oregonians, in particular people of color and marginalized communities, and this all in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It has a lot of support already from a lot of associations in these fields. There are no agencies that have signed on yet, and of course with Representative Bynum being not solely in Clackamas County, but dominantly in Clackamas County, she's reached out to us as a primary agency. There are other elected officials with Multnomah County and the city of Portland who have signed on, but no other agencies, but it has strong association support. H3S has some general concern about the letter, or has some general support for the letter, but they do have concerns about the one topic about the amount of hours to attain licensure and the recommendation to lower that. But they do admit that it would absolutely increase the flow of new workers into the field. So, I'll leave this to you. It's a request for you to sign on or not. If you don't sign on, you have the option of doing what other elected officials are doing, which is independent support, which you already have that a right to do as elected officials anyway. But it's generally supported by our county departments.
So it's not the facility in Wilsonville?
No.
Okay.
We have hands up from Commissioner Fisher, Commissioner Humberston, and Commissioner Savis.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, so I would echo H3S's concerns about lowering the hours for licensure. This has been a fight for many, many years at the legislature, and I don't like using a COVID crisis to circumvent or go above things that have been in the public discourse for a really long time. There's a real good reason why there are these requirements for hours to have a licensure. I mean, it's a certain credential and it's a certain form of professionalism. That being said, we do need more access, but maybe there's other solutions that we can garner, such as paraprofessional, like you have for nurses, you have nurses, and you have LPNs and you have CNAs, and maybe there needs to be something similar within mental health. But just removing the licensure for certain credentials, that's a real concern of mine. So I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
Okay, who was next? Ken?
Yeah.
So two questions. Is this only for the period of time that the COVID-19 pandemic is being addressed, or is this a permanent request? And secondly, does it increase any county liability?
I don't believe that this is limited just to the COVID-19 pandemic, and making changes like what are proposed would probably be longer term. Supporting concepts like this doesn't typically have liability, but I'm also not a lawyer, and I would defer to county counsel for any comments on that.
I mean, it's one thing to do something on a temporary basis in an emergency and get more boots on the ground, so to speak. I could probably wrap my mind around that, assuming we don't actually increase the liability to the county. But if it's just an end run around appropriate professional licensure long-term, then I would be more inclined to agree with Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that's been said. But from our conversation from last week, my issue was around capacity and where we ranked in the nation. And Mary Jo was kind enough to send 2 links to 2 articles, which answered a couple of the questions I had, which, frankly, appears that it is not this letter, but the capacity issue. And I'm not one to mix the two, but I guess what I really am lacking right now is an understanding where the bottlenecks are. I was under the impression for a long time that is either money or capacity, and we lack in both. So if this letter, which seems to be targeted more towards trying to get more boots on the ground, if you will, into the system, that's fine. But if there's not a place to work and there's not the money to pay them, then what is the benefit? So this is not the setting, but from a mental health standpoint, as far as providing the service and the capacity needs, where are the bottlenecks? Is this really one of them? If there's not really a place for those people to work?
So my concern is, who are we to judge what qualifications people have to do their work? I'm just a county commissioner. I'm not a doctor. I can't make a decision like this, so I don't support signing the letter.
Certainly not without more information. Again, whether or not it's a permanent request or just a temporary request would be one thing, and then obviously whether or not that increases our liability. So I'd say no at this time for sure.
So yes or no? No. All right, it's a no. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right, next item.
Thank you, Trent. Next, Elizabeth Comfort and Krista Wolf from the Finance Department to propose or share with you cost recovery policy. You'll remember, Commissioners, this was discussed at the Budget Committee meeting, the last one in February, I think. So we're closing the loop with you now before we make it final. So I'll ask Krista to please present, or Elizabeth, go ahead.
Thank you, Gary. Commissioners, I believe you are aware that you should have this policy in your possession now. It is the cost recovery policy. We first started talking about this a year ago, I believe last May, around the topic of our budget and creating a more financially and fiscally sustainable budget. You've seen the policy has been approved by the Budget Committee in our committee meeting in February. And the extent of the policy, of course, to recover costs to the extent where legally possible for all the services and programs provided. It does require, if there are exceptions to be granted, it does require Board of County Commissioner approval for those exceptions. Are there questions that you have about this policy in front of you that I can answer?
No, thought it was good.
Thank you. Thanks to the hard work of our budget task force that helped the Finance Department with this policy.
So I would request a motion to approve, Commissioners, if you are inclined to do that.
So moved.
Second.
Jim, you're on mute, Jim. You're muted, Jim.
You didn't hear me swear then. It's been moved and second to approve the cost recovery program. So any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Oh, wait, Paul.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Humberston,
Aye.
Chair Bernard.
Aye, motion carries unanimously. I'm sorry we can't agree on everything.
Well done.
Next
So we'll
item.
move forward with that. And Krista, I want to thank you for your background. I noticed that. That's a Star Wars background. Well done.
Oh,
Thank you. Like
Thank you.
Star Wars.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Next, if it looks like Rich Swift is on. There he is, Rich. And Mary Rumbaugh, is she on line? We're working on that, maybe. All right. Well, we'll start with Rich. This is Commissioner's Willamette Valley Behavioral Health Facility update. You asked for more information about this last week. So we have Rich Swift, the Director of Health, Housing, and Human Services, and Mary Rumbaugh, if she's online, to give you a background. Go ahead,
I
Rich.
am online. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Mary will be joining us shortly.
I'm here.
Hey, Mary.
Thanks.
Yeah, she's here. Go ahead, Rich or Mary.
So I guess, I've had a number of conversations with different commissioners regarding this topic. And so at this point, I guess I was wondering what questions people had. My recommendation to the board had been in regards to this particular question of a hospital, a psychiatric hospital opening in Wilsonville that is actually within the Washington County borders, was that we would follow Washington County's lead in this.
so this was, I guess, Paul's talk about capacity issues. I don't know why we were discussing this either, because in the Tri-County Chair discussions, we specifically asked, did Washington County support this? And they do not. And it's in their county. So why are we making this? But Paul had a good question though about capacity. We lack capacity. Why wouldn't we support this particular one?
It seems to me, though, that a big part of this whole squabble, and that's what bothers me to take a position on it, is it seems to have like a big fight between two companies or corporations about market share and money underlying the whole thing. Maybe my take on that is wrong, but that's my impression.
So Paul, who has questions?
Richard?
Commissioner Fisher,
Well,
Yeah,
what we'll do is
we-
ask our questions and let him answer.
So we brought this up last week because the Association for Oregon Counties Health and Human Services Committee was looking to support the governor's position that this hospital would have to go through the certificate of need process. So the thought was that if the Tri-County, if Washington County and Multnomah County wanted to send a letter, we would just say, yeah, we'd go along with it. But right now, I think this issue is moot because we have checked with the Oregon Health Authority and with the governor's office through AOC, and the governor is not doing an end run around the process for this hospital. They have to go through the same process. So I don't think there's anything on this issue that we need to do now because we have other things we need to deal with. But to Paul's point, just about the whole mental health system, I think this is an area where we really do need to get better educated, especially now because this crisis of COVID-19 is bringing the real needs of our system to the forefront. And we have the opportunity to get through this through our recovery better than we were before if we really recognize where our vulnerabilities are. So that, I think, we should get on the agenda. When Rich and Mary are overwhelmed with the crisis, actually, we have to do one thing at a time.
We would love to have that conversation, and that would be a great conversation for us to have. But also, I do appreciate the board's patience in regards to our capacity to put together the materials needed for that conversation. Right now, we are a little at eyeball depth in terms of COVID-19.
Drenda, who's in charge of? You are?
of what?
Drenda, you're watching the thing?
Right, so Commissioner Savas.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how much of the conversation everyone's aware of from last week that my colleagues and I participated in on this topic. But after the meeting, a day later, I think Mary Jo sent a couple article links, which told me that this hospital's been trying to get, or this project's been trying to get underway for 3 years. And if the process takes 3 years, or it's 3 years because it's political, I don't know which. I don't know how much credence and I don't know what in the articles I should really say is accurate, or maybe there's missing parts of the story, but it appears it is political. It does appear there's a market share issue. And my comments last week are, so if we rank 50th, meaning really at the bottom, we're the bottom in the country as far as providing mental health services, then is it a money issue? And is that why there's a fight for, one company to say, to politically lobby, all the elected officials not to support this and make them extend the process beyond 3 years? Because I'm concerned that the longer this crisis goes on, the need for mental health services is going to grow. And if we're not prepared and having the facility, it doesn't seem responsible to let politics get in the way or interfering and not building our capacity if it's truly needed. So if we're comfortable at being at the bottom of the nation at 50, then let's just say so. And let's just be at the bottom of 50. I don't know what it is. Is it money? I need help with this. I need help understanding what the issue is. And I don't know what credence to put in the articles.
So we don't even know if they've even tried to fill out a need analysis. We don't even know if they've tried, or they've just been trying to get around this for this whole time.
Did you read the articles, Jim?
No, I did not. I didn't see them.
Yeah, apparently they've been trying for 3 years.
So there's no way for me to raise my hand. So when it's appropriate, Brenda, if I could add a few comments. Sorry.
Well, that's Mary. Well, let's go to Mary.
Thank you, Chair Bernard. So they have previously gone through the certificate of need. They were not approved. They appealed it. That also was not approved. And Commissioner Savas, I would say that this is actually about money, but it's about money invested in the community mental health system. Standing up a 100-bed standalone hospital, it helps in the moment, but it actually doesn't. Eventually, those folks need to come back into mental health services in the community. So the concern is the investment for mental health services should actually go to community mental health, not another standalone hospital. That's actually a for-profit.
Okay, can I ask you a question, Mary?
Sure.
So I can't remember how long ago. I think it was twice now. I've heard probably within a year, and then the last and the one previous was probably a couple of years ago. I've heard things like, for example, that there's not enough room for emergency treatment for mental health, so that we had a capacity issue. I also heard that from emergency responders, including the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, for example, that we had participated in a facility in Multnomah County, and we put a little bit of money in, and we didn't have very much money to put in, but that there's a shortage of beds. So while I understand the shortage of beds, if that's accurate, and now you're explaining to me that there's also a shortage of maybe services in a localized area, but to what degree is that shortage? It seems to be constant that there's this bed shortage. And I recently had some involvement in helping someone in the Salem area, and was kind of impressed with theirs. And even they had a capacity issue to some degree, but I was relatively impressed on how, and the facilities that they offered and the services they offered in the Salem area, which is a joint venture between Polk County and Marion County, and I believe one other county. Can you speak to that at all?
I mean, I can certainly speak to that. There are differing opinions about whether we have enough capacity of inpatient hospital beds across the state, and it's complicated by folks who are civilly committed. It's complicated by folks who are under forensic evaluation. So it is a much larger conversation. But again, Commissioner Savas, I think your point is a good one, which is this particular hospital, there are politics involved and there is money involved. And so I think the decision last week, or the conversation last week, to actually, allow the certificate of need approval just to go forward and not to not have it bypassed because of the pandemic is actually really the right thing. And I think there will be a future opportunity to continue to talk about what is the need for not only the Tri-County, but our particular community as well, especially as we become more aware of people who are in need of mental health services.
Is this facility even built? I mean, does this building structure exist?
No.
Okay, so so if in 5 months this crisis gets really, really bad and there's a big need for beds, we're ill prepared, right?
I can answer that.
Uh,
State,
Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you. So the one question I had actually, Commissioner Saab, was to, maybe elucidate your point a little bit further. This individual that you helped, you happen to know if they were pursuing services on the Medicaid side of behavioral health?
No, they were not. It was not Medicaid.
Okay. So that's a pretty good outcome. I think the piece here to remember is the Medicaid versus the for-profit system within behavioral health, and those are to some degree different. And so this hospital and the parent company running this particular hospital are on the for-profit side of behavioral health. The parent company for Universal Health, I forget the A, what it stands for. They're not necessarily the best track record, particularly in the Medicaid space. And so that is Washington County's concern. And I think maybe one of the reasons that their initial application for a certificate and the resulting appeal process was denied. So Washington County still does not believe that this particular partner is going to bring to behavioral health for Washington County, nor in the region, what they need to be able to respond to behavioral health. We are concerned, like you are, regarding bed availability and also how to, from an emergency standpoint, how to respond. And so the problem with this is the partner that's coming forward does not have, and saying that they wish to play in this area and participate, does not have a resounding track record, in this space. And so there's a lot of hesitancy to take them at their word, because nationally, when you look across what they've done, the track record's not there.
Well, any other questions?
Yes, we have Commissioner Schrader and Commissioner Humberston.
All right, Commissioner Schrader.
So I'm going to unmute here. So isn't this a problem within the entire system? Because didn't we at one point give money for a systems approach with 3 of the nonprofit hospitals to acquire more beds, and that evidently wasn't as successful or as people thought it was going to be? That's what I'm, yeah, so.
So back in, I think it was 2014, 2015, I forget the exact budget year, the county, using reserves from the Clackamas Health Centers, gave $200,000 to Unity in its development to open up that both Medicaid-based psychiatric hospital and also 23-hour response system. And they were quickly inundated related to the behavioral health need across the region. Some of the aspects of that treatment have proven a little difficulty because it is still, from the Wilsonville area, for example, since we are talking in Wilsonville, it's a long drive to transport someone from the Wilsonville area up to essentially downtown Portland, because the Unity is is pretty close to or the Moda Center, excuse me. So we have had conversations about what it would look like to have some sort of Unity-based or Unity-type system in the southern part of the region. The reality is this particular partner is probably not the partner we wish to do business with.
Right,
And,
we need
And
to move on. We're getting behind.
I know, but I have one more question, and it's largely because they won't accept Medicaid, because that's also something that's systemic in the medical system.
They begrudgingly will begrudgingly take Medicaid, and they take a very, very small number.
Okay. But my other follow-up with that is, isn't that the same problem the rest of the hospitals, whether they're profits or nonprofits? I mean, you hear about these conflicts between Providence and Legacy because who's taking their fair share of Medicaid patients. So is this really unusual, or is this just systemic throughout the medical system?
Mary, you want to jump in on that?
I mean, primarily those hospitals like Providence and Unity obviously primarily do serve actually Medicaid folks. There is something unique about this particular for-profit hospital that actually limits the number of Medicaid patients they can take. So that's part of the complexity of it.
All right, Ken?
All right, they don't limit, huh?
Just in response to the question about beds for acute cases, the state hospital has plenty of beds. All that needs is the staffing to go with it. Building another facility at this point doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Appropriate staffing at the state hospital, you have a facility already in place. So I'm not convinced that we need to even stick our oar in the water of a facility in Washington County at all.
I'm not. Anyway, ready to move on next issue?
Thank you, Rich and Mary, for the
Thank
update.
you.
Next is Caroline Hill. Will give you a brief update, commissioners, on the small grants program at the mid-year point, which is right now. Go ahead, Caroline.
You should be on in just a second, Mr. Administrator.
Oh, here I am. Okay. Hi. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Administrator Schmidt. I am Caroline Hill from County Administration. I am joining you today via Zoom to provide you with a mid-year report on the 2019-2020 Small Grants Awards progress. On October 1st, the board approved the Small Grants Awards totaling $250,000.
Oh God, no doubt about that. I'm up.
Rich, you're on, Rich. We hear you.
In this cycle, 38 out of 95 applicants
Go ahead, Caroline.
received some funding through this program. Award checks were processed through the fall, and these organizations began to put the money to good use. One of the requirements for the recipients is that they provide a mid-year report to let me know of the progress they are making, the impact thus far, and if there are any obstacles that they are encountering. This report was due on March 31st. I am here to share some highlights of their progress. A common theme that I noticed in reviewing the reports is that due to COVID, many food pantries have seen an increase in requests for food. Many of them asked me about additional resources that I may direct them to. A good example is Christ Divine. Prior to the pandemic, they were providing 4 to 5 food boxes per week, but now they're at 12. In other instances, some organizations have found that if they work collaboratively, they can continue to serve their populations. A good example is the Estacada Evangelical Ministry, which runs the Backpack Buddies for the school district. With the school closures, they were not going to be able to provide their services to the students. They worked with the school district and came up with a plan in which they prepare the deliveries and the district delivers the food to the students over the weekend. Another good example of creativity in continuing to provide services during this time is the Community Connect program from Ant Farm. The project is an expansion of an already established program, taking it into Estacada. They have been able to continue to provide much needed services for seniors and homebound people while providing youth with great work experience, all while being able to follow social distancing. For that, they prepared a very thoughtful triaging process that allows them to reach many people and ensure everyone's safety. My last example of the great work these organizations do is the Angels in the Outfield. Using the grant money, they have been able to assist 12 families in finding some stability after escaping domestic violence. This help can be a down payment for a new place to rent or eviction prevention, all focused on healing of the children affected by these circumstances. These are just some examples of the great impact the Small Grants has through the many nonprofit organizations serving the residents of the county. While a couple of the organizations have had to temporarily shut down due to safety reasons because of the pandemic, most are working extra hard to ensure that people have access to services. I am happy to entertain any questions or comments. Thank you.
Questions?
I don't see any raised hand.
Great. I'd just like to say, originally I thought that in the budget process, we shouldn't do the grants. I think it's more important now than it's ever been. and feeding and housing people should be our priority. So I'm hoping we can find the money to keep this at somewhere around 250. Anyway, thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. All right, next, review of your business meeting agenda, Commissioners, this Thursday, April 30th. It is an evening business meeting at 6 p.m., which will be on Zoom remotely. You have a Housing Authority consent agenda, a public hearing, a first reading of an ordinance to amend the county code regarding layoff and seniority of personnel policies and procedures for Clackamas County. This is about bumping rights for non-represented employees. You've been briefed at 2 issue sessions prior to this week. And then you have a consent agenda, nothing which appears to be controversial, but if you do have any questions on any part of the agenda, please let me know in advance and staff will answer them for you before Thursday. Commissioner Schrader had a request that we send a thank you note to our sister province in China, Fujian province, who donated those masks to us a few weeks ago. So if you are okay, Commissioners, we will prepare a thank you note on behalf of the board. See thumbs up. Very good. Commissioner Fisher, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. So I was looking through the agenda, which I did before we talked about it, and I noticed in the consent agenda for housing that we are approving the annual plan through the consent agenda, and I just didn't know if per requirements for public notice, if that plan needs to be in our materials, because it's not. I didn't know if it needed to be.
We will find that out for you, Commissioners. I believe so. We did have an issue session with you on the plan a week or so ago.
Yep.
And
I understand that. I just thought it should actually be in the materials when it's posted for the public, and it's not there. So
okay.
Just bringing that to your attention.
We will follow up with staff on that. Thank you, Commissioner.
All right.
Any other questions about the business meeting agenda at this point? Okay, so we will go ahead and do the thank you note for the Fujian province in China. Next, advisory board and commission approvals. Kevin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. So we were asked to bring back the planning commission for that, and I believe the board, you just wanted to discuss the new appointment of the Cary Park, which you had originally approved last week, and then you asked to bring it back, and Gary had more information on what happened with the other gentleman who applied, so I'll let him speak to that.
Yeah, so this is about the Planning Commission. Commissioner Fisher had asked us to do some research on an individual who had expressed interest in the position. There's a long email stream which we forwarded to you, Commissioners, but the bottom line is this individual did not submit an application for the Planning Commission. At one point we thought it was missing, but we did confirm with the applicant, if you want to apply, contact this person directly, and that person then chose not to apply. So at this point, we're suggesting you either go forward with the process or reopen the process and we can ask the individual to apply again. But I'm recommending you move forward as is. There is an opening on the Planning Commission in just a few more months. So this individual could choose to apply at that point as well.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you. So I did see the string of all the emails. I really appreciate the research because this person did reach out to me, wanted to meet with me, wanted to make sure I knew he was applying, and then I didn't see his name. So my only thought was I didn't know what was happening as far as somebody reaching out to him to confirm all of this. I thought that would be part of this process before today, and I've just found out that that did not happen. And so my suggestion would be, unless there's an emergency, that we at least just punt this so that I can give him a call and let him know he can apply in a few months, and somehow we did not receive the application that he thought that he submitted.
In the interest of expediency to some degree, if there is indeed an opening coming around, as Gary Schmidt indicated, and there is an opportunity for him to apply, and the fact that if he was not interested in actually filling out the application, then I guess, am I hearing two different things? But I'm willing to go forward, but Gary, you just indicated he did not pursue the opportunity to fill out an application. It was, and when circled back, did not want to pursue that. Is that correct?
He did not submit an application after being contacted several times by staff, but we did not call him in the last 2 weeks to find out what exactly happened. That has not happened.
So can we I'll just go call him now and I'll step away from the meeting. And then we can revisit this at the end of today after our policy sessions. I just don't feel comfortable when somebody reaches out to me to make sure things are done correctly. And then obviously there's some miscommunication and we just don't circle back with him. I didn't want to double work this and call him myself while staff was doing the work. But since I know that didn't happen, that's what I would suggest. So I'll just step away and we can deal with this later. Is that okay?
All right, I guess. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, what's the next item?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, Commissioner Savas, did you have a question on that?
I just think I just think from a process standpoint, if it was 2 weeks, I mean, these people filled out their application long before 2 weeks ago, the people that actually went through the process. So it feels as though that, that I don't know, it just doesn't feel fair.
Well, I'm gonna vote to appoint the people who have filled out the application. But if she feels she'd like to call them, I guess that's fine, call them. Ken? Your mic's off.
Ken.
Thank you. I participated with Commissioner Savas on the selection. We got a good committee member. I just assume move forward, especially knowing that within a few months there's going to be an opening and he can have the opportunity to apply again. And I know Mr. Rep, he's usually a pretty reasonable guy. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. But the fact is, he didn't fill out the application.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just think there's there shouldn't be a different standard. I don't want to use the double standard as a negative, but there shouldn't be a different standard. And I didn't get involved in the last budget committee member that had the email sent to a wrong address, which is a mistake on our staff, not his. And just seems that that's a standard in which I chose not to get to involve myself in, and just let staff to handle it. So if there's an opportunity for us to get involved with people's applications, then we're setting a precedent that we should all be comfortable with. Then.
Yeah. Well, what's the next issue?
All right, so we can hold on this while Commissioner Fisher makes her call. There's another advisory board, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is your Development Agency Budget Committee, and staff is recommending a reappointment of Ed Gronke.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second to appoint Ed Gronke. Any further comments or questions? Go ahead and poll us.
Kevin, are you?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner Humbertson.
Aye.
Chair Bernard.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. Next item.
At this point, all that's left is Commissioner Communications, but I propose we hold that. Let's go to the policy sessions. We'll loop back around to Commissioner Communications and this Planning Commission decision at the end of the policy sessions today, if that's all right, Chair?
Sure.
All right, so our first policy session is proposed renewable electricity for county operations. We have two separate departments presenting on the same topic, Transportation and Development and Water Environment Services. We will start with Transportation and Development, and we have multiple staff present. So I'll ask, I guess, Cheryl, I'll start with you and take it from there, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, commissioners. It's nice to see you. It's been a while. I know we are tight on time, so I am going to jump right in and just quickly lay some groundwork for you for this policy session. The session you are hearing today is actually a joint session because staff from facilities, DTD, and WES have been working really collaboratively on a one county focus to lower the carbon footprint of our electricity use. In January, when we came to you to discuss the scope of work for the Climate Action Plan, you asked us to come back with some near-term measures to reduce our climate impact while we're waiting for the Climate Action Plan to be developed. And so the policy session you're going to hear today is in direct response to that ask. We also had previously planned to be here in March with you, so that you could have made some decisions, and we'd use those to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which was April 22nd. But of course, COVID-19 happened, world's access shifted, and things got delayed. But today, the decisions you make will help not only in kind of celebration in honor of Earth Day, but helping us advance your goal of climate action and being carbon neutral by 2050. This is one of the key strategies to help us move the needle. So with that, I am going to turn it over to the experts for DTD, Sarah Allison and Eben Polk, who will be discussing the strategies we're proposing for the county, not including special districts. And then Greg Geist and Greg Irely are going to be discussing the West strategies for their special district.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. It's good to be with you this afternoon. We're super excited to be here to bring this topic before you. And just to set the stage a tiny bit more, as a reminder, just for your recall, this is the topic that we presented to you about it feels like a couple of years ago, but on February 12th, we had a good exploratory conversation with you in the board's conference room on this topic. So one of the things that you heard at that point, and I'd like to reiterate a few things before we get into the specifics, is that our carbon footprint, our greenhouse gas emissions as a county, is 18% from our electricity consumption. And you have a packet there that illustrates some of this on your third slide, which speaks to the operational greenhouse gas inventory from 2017. You'll see there that electricity accounts for 18% of our carbon footprint, and that includes our special districts. This is also the simplest opportunity to make a quick impact on our carbon footprint because with a few relatively simple procurement decisions, we can eliminate that piece of our footprint. So a little bit about the status quo. Right now in this fiscal year, we have budgeted $51,000 for purchasing renewable energy credits. And the renewable energy credit is essentially a tool that allows an electricity consumer like us to claim credit for clean electricity on the grid. And it's one strategy to reduce our carbon footprint. So that purchase, again, budgeted for this year, $51,000, is addressing the 50% of our electricity that is supplied by fossil fuels. A little more context, we spend about $3.6 million a year on electricity, and that includes all special districts. So the costs that we are talking about for renewable electricity, as they've come down into that neighborhood of $51,000 on the high end, and a proposal that we have for you today is going to take us more towards $5,000. It's a relatively small amount on looking at our overall electricity spend. I have mentioned that that 18% of our carbon footprint that comes from electricity includes our special districts, and that'll be basically the last we get into the districts in this conversation until Wes comes on to give you their strategy. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the different options that we're looking at right now. We're proposing a blend of 3 options, one that's already at our disposal, REX, plus 2 new options. And those 2 that we would need to start opting into this year. So there is some time sensitivity to it, even though they won't come online until the next year or 2. So one of those, again, remains renewable energy credits. Those are a flexible, fungible, basically a commodity. And we have options to choose those at any time we want at a range of prices. And we can specify where we want those renewable energy credits to come from within Oregon or within the Pacific Northwest or maybe anywhere in the United States. And those are our only option today for addressing our carbon footprint from electricity, aside from building our own solar arrays. All right, the next option that we'll get into a little bit is called Green Futures. This is a program that PGE is developing for significant commercial customers. It's a lower cost than renewable energy credits, and it's a higher impact because it involves the creation of new renewable facilities in the Pacific Northwest. and we would be contracting for a 10 or 15 year period for a direct procurement of clean electricity from that facility. The third piece is even more local. It's called the Community Solar Program. And it's something that was created under state legislation that allows solar developers to build commercial scale projects that community members can tap into directly. And there are some permitted projects in Clackamas County that we would like your permission to do some more due diligence in to explore for our own electricity needs. That's a limited time opportunity because those projects are going to get built and they're going to get subscribed. So we'd like to partner potentially with some of these solar developers to procure some of that electricity for a 10-year basis. And those projects would be in Clackamas County. Also want to note that our housing authority is interested potentially in participating in community solar. One of the neat things about community solar projects is that they are required to carve out 20% of their power for low-income community members. And those low-income community members would see a 20% discount on their electricity costs. So if we can see a way to participating in this for low-income housing residents in the county, we can find a way to reduce cost of electricity service for a few folks. If we participate in all of these three options together, then we think we can reduce our cost to stay carbon neutral for our electricity in a pretty significant way, while also still supporting more local and regional projects. So we think it's a great value proposition that still has a beneficial, a benefit to our general fund. So I'd like to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to tell us a little bit more about each of these three options before we ask you for direction. Sarah?
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. And if we can go to slide 14, that shows sort of a summary of everything that I'll be covering. So in terms of the options as they are laid out in the packet, each one of these options is currently laid out as an individual option. So each one of these strategies could be pursued independently. They can also be merged, as Eben mentioned, into more of a portfolio approach. And so the costs that are currently associated under each option are under the assumption that you would pursue that option completely, but those costs would be reduced if you combine different options. So just that for context. So option one looks at the green futures option. This is one strategy that absolutely has the capacity to meet the entire need for the county to have carbon neutral electricity. The cost listed here is for a 10-year contract. So that is the shorter end of the contract. If we pursued a longer contract, the cost would be reduced. And the option, as it's noted here, does not entail any cost at this time. So the intent of this option is to position staff to pursue this option up until the point that we would bring it back to the commission, because this is an option that when it was offered previously was fully subscribed in a matter of minutes. So it is one that is time sensitive once it is made live, but we currently do not have a set time for this option to be offered again. The second option is for community solar, which Eben mentioned. So this is a strategy that does not have any additional cost, but it does have limited capacity. So it's unlikely that this strategy in and of itself would be able to cover the county's full need for carbon-free electricity. Again, this option positions staff to establish a non-binding letter of interest and would still come back to the board for final approval. The third option is REX, which, as Eben mentioned, is the only option that is completely available to the county at this point. And so that this particular option talks about reducing our current general fund obligation by half to reduce the amount of REX that the county is purchasing to only cover county departments and to exclude the special districts which have other options for pursuing renewable electricity, as Wes will discuss in the next section. And then, of course, the fourth option, the board always has the option to take no action. So we wanted to explicitly note that that is an option. And then I'll turn it back over to Eben to discuss the staff recommendation.
Okay, Our recommendation is to pursue a blend of all three of these strategies because we think it's the most cost effective and offers the most value to support renewable energy projects within Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. So again, that's options 1, 2, and 3. Number 1 is to direct staff to pre-enroll in and develop a contract with PGE for green futures. And that would be up to $12,750 a year, but that's probably not the cost it would actually entail. That's the cost if we covered 100% of the county's electricity needs with that source. Second recommendation is directing staff to pursue a non-binding letter of intent with a community solar developer in Clackamas County up to 8,500 megawatt hours annually. And again, there's no additional cost for that. And thirdly, to direct staff to reduce our budget request for next year for renewable energy credit purchases down to $25,000 to maintain carbon-free electricity for the near term. And then we would use RECs as a gap filler in the years to come as we bring more renewable energy online. So we recommend pursuing all three of those simultaneously for the best value and benefit to the general fund and sort of the overall carbon picture. With that, questions?
You have Commissioner Humberson with his hand raised.
I just wanted to commend Eben and his team for putting this together. I remember when you originally made this proposal and these combinations back a few months ago, and I was really pleased with what you've come up with. And when the chair is prepared to accept a motion, I am certainly prepared to make one on your recommendations.
Commissioner Schrader?
Commissioner Schrader, where are you?
Microphone.
Okay. Well, we have Commissioner Savas.
Well, yeah, I appreciate all the good work and I appreciate sitting in on that session. I learned a lot. And so I'm quite prepared and comfortable today to move forward.
Sorry, guys, I lost you for a minute. But I just wanted to thank Eben for all the hard work he has done. This is absolutely fantastic. It's like a 2 thumbs up.
So, Mr. Chairman, are you prepared for a motion?
It's off. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the staff recommendation of options 1, 2, and 3.
Second.
It's moved and second to take staff recommendations and move forward. Any further discussion? Kevin, go ahead and poll.
Okay.
Or Brenda, whoever.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Humberston?
Aye.
Chair Bernard?
Aye, motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, guys.
All right, so
Thank you
it's
all.
same
Thank you,
top-
commissioners.
Thank you all. Same topic. Now we invite the Water Environment Services team to give you their proposals related to this topic. We have Greg Geist, the director, and whomever else he wants to bring in. So Greg, muted Greg.
Nope, I'm good. I think there's two me's. Greg Irely is also me. So
Okay, sorry.
good
There you
good
are.
afternoon.
Yeah, right.
All right. Good afternoon, commissioners. Greg Geist, Water Environment Services Director. Happy to be with you today. As you're going to see, once you look at the first slide of Greg's Irely's presentation, WES is the largest greenhouse gas contributor of all of the departments in Clackamas County. And the biggest chunk of our greenhouse gas emissions are related to electricity use. Our annual electricity bill is about $1.4 million. You can see that there in the blue bar chart to the far left. We've made a lot of strides in recent years. As we replace equipment, we partner with Oregon Energy Trust. You've seen some of those big checks that they presented in front of the commission before. We undertook strategic energy management at one of our facilities and saved, I believe at this point, millions of kilowatt hours based on that. And we're going to be making more of our own energy later this year when our digester project comes online. But we wanted to, in keeping with the county's climate action plan and our own leaders in sustainability certification, we wanted to take a big chunk, if possible, out of that blue bar chart there and bring our greenhouse gas footprint down significantly. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Greg Irely, and he's going to talk to you about what we found our options to be and what our recommendation is going to be.
Sure. Thank you, Greg. As Greg said, there's 4 different ways that we went about this. We met with PGE, and we generated 4 basic options. And just to put those options in terms that I understand, is option 1 was to get RECs. So that's like going to the store and buying organic apples, and those organic apples are from anywhere. The second was to purchase renewable RECs that are from clean sources, and they're located, could be anywhere in the Pacific Northwest. Different options. So that would be like going to the store and buying apples, sourced from the Pacific Northwest. And the third was to buy apples only from Hood River, Oregon-based apples, local apples. They're the most expensive, and that was the Oregon-based RECs of $5 to $6 per megawatt hour. And the fourth option was what Eben spoke to earlier, which was green feature impacts. And in my perspective, that was like investing in an apple orchard and buying the apples from that orchard. So the orchard hasn't been planted yet. We're gonna plant an orchard, and we're gonna agree to buy those apples for 10 to 15 years. So that's the fourth option. And we took those options to the board. Next slide. This is just more background information of how the green features impacts works. We can move past these. The Board of County Commissioners is obviously much more educated on this. And keep moving. There we go. So what we can keep moving and moving. So back to the options. Let's go back. So we took these options to the West Advisory Committee, and a couple of the members on the West Advisory Committee are from the City of Milwaukee and City Council member, and as well as the mayor from West Lynn. Both of those cities, City of Milwaukee, City of West Lynn, have already participated in green futures impacts investment options. And the caveat with picking the green futures impacts is the window of time that you have to invest in that cohort is very limited. They sold out the last cohort for green future impacts in 92 seconds. So you have to have almost a pre-approval plan ahead. And so we went to the West Advisory Committee and presented the 4 options. And what they recommended to bring to the board was the go ahead and to invest into green feature impacts. However, with West, we can't, of our $1.4 million, we can't invest necessarily all $1.4 million into green feature impacts. We would be paying twice for some of those energy credits. We also produce our own energy, and we'll produce more and more of our own energy into the future. So it's difficult for us to invest all $1.4 million. So we have to invest a portion of that, say half of that, into green feature impacts, and then make the rest up with RECs. And so the question became, what type of RECs? National RECs, regional RECs, or local RECs? So the advisory board gave the green light for us to bring to you the idea that we would invest in green feature impacts approximately half of our $1.4 million towards that direction to buy RECs. And then the second is to buy Oregon-based local RECs, which has the highest premium. And the total dollar investment that would require on behalf of Wes and the county would be approximately $78,000. Again, that's approximate because we don't know what the cost will be for green feature impacts. The cost of the different cohorts depend on the technology that's invested in, and that can vary. So at worst case scenario, it'd be $78,000 on $1.4 million to spend about half of that $1.4 million towards the green feature impacts and half towards RECs locally based in Oregon. If we were to change that to regionally based RECs, it would drop to about $42,000 as the total cost of investing in green renewable energy. So that's the question. Do we go with the option of the premium package, which is the $78,000, half towards green feature, half towards Oregon-based RECs, or do we go towards the gold package, which is half towards green feature impacts and half towards regionally based RECs at about $42,000. And so we're looking for that framework to get ourselves into position for when this cohort opens up, that we can go out and get the best deal for the county for renewable green feature impacts.
Questions?
I don't see any hands.
I just wanted to say there's no oranges in this story.
All right, you need a motion?
Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the staff recommendation then.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to approve the staff recommendation. Any further discussion?
One question.
Yes, sir.
Just curious as to why you didn't just go 1, 2, 3 like the previous presentation. Because the way your recommendation is written is a little bit confusing, and it seemed like the previous presentation kept it simple. You could take advantage of all 3 options if they're available.
They did it just to confuse you, Ken.
I think my only answer to that is Eben just did a better job than we did.
Well, the force is still strong with you all, right, Greg? I like your background. Thank you. Star Wars, very good.
It's fine. Thank you.
All right, so there was a motion, a second. Why don't you go ahead and poll us?
Okay, Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Humberston.
Aye.
Chair Bernard.
Aye, motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. And Greg? All right, commissioners, do you want to take a 2-minute stretch break?
Why don't we find out what Sonia found out?
All right, so we'll come back to the issues topic of the Planning Commission appointments. Commissioner Fisher.
So I looked back through my text messages, and what Rob Repp said is that he applied to the Planning Commission and that he wanted to use me as a reference, and could I talk to him? And it was at the beginning of the Corona crisis, and I said, please work with staff, go through the process, referred him to staff, and didn't have any further contact until we had this email train. I tried to call him. His phone rang and rang and rang, and there was no voicemail. And so I sent him the email with all of the communications. Gary, I CC'd you, I CC'd Dan, and I CC'd Mary Jo. This was a fall through the cracks on my part because I didn't follow back up with him. And he had reached out to me in particular, and I take responsibility for not following up after I got the emails from Gary, from you and Dan. I don't know what the deal is with Robert Repp, and I think we don't know either, except he thinks he applied. That's all I know. So that's what I got for you. I don't have.
All right, so did we already make the motion?
No.
Okay, So is there a motion to appoint those that have been recommended?
Yeah, I move to approve the recommendations of the committee, and would encourage Mr. Rep to apply for the next vacancy.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and second to appoint the recommended members to the Planning Commission. Any further discussion? Please poll the commission.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
No.
Commissioner Humberston,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Bernard.
Aye, motion carries 4-1. All right, next, so we're going to take a couple-minute break.
So take a 2-minute stretch break, and then we'll go to our next policy session.
All right, thank you. Let's go.
Okay, next, commissioners, is Department of Transportation and Development fee change proposals for fiscal year 2020, 2021. We have Dan Johnson, the director of the department, and Diedre Landon to present.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Dan Johnson here, Director of Transportation Development. First, a quick apology for the hat. Didn't know there was an option to keep your camera off. And this no barber struggle is a real thing. I just don't really know what to do with this. So my apologies.
Okay.
It's kind of awkward that I have a tie that matches it, though. It's a long story. Anyway, I am really pleased to be here with Diedre Landon to share our annual changes or proposed changes to transportation development fees with the board. Fees are a discussion we have every year, but a couple of things before Diedre provides a deeper dive into the materials. One, the package is thick and complicated, but no, it's not all around fee increases. It also includes a wide range of housekeeping items to clarify fee titles and standardize application of various fees across departments. Also, with direction from Clackamas County Budget Committee and the Board of County Commissioners, we've worked to advance a data-driven assessment of permitting costs. We do that through job costing and true-up assessments, define the scope of our service to our citizens, through a statistical measurement of customer interactions versus development permitting, and some consideration of assessment of comparable fees to other jurisdictions. Just briefly about programmatic cost recovery. You had a discussion from finance earlier about their new objectives and policy. Historically, there's been a number of discussions regarding permit cost recovery versus programmatic cost recovery. They're different. The information we present to you is based off of costs to process various permits within the organization, meaning DTD, mostly planning department as a whole. That data then educates the discussion on programmatic cost recovery, essentially what percentage of your overall programmatic costs are recovered through permit revenues. The information we're sharing with you today targets 100% permit cost recovery, which equates to a programmatic cost recovery, which is much less, which we'll discuss more further here in the presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Diedre Landon to provide a little more clarity on the package before you today. Diedre?
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for having me today. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So as Dan mentioned, we are proposing 3 different types of revisions today. First, we have some housekeeping. Second, we are proposing increases to cover actual costs to improve cost recovery in some of our programs. And finally, we're proposing annual Consumer Price Index or CPI adjustments to the countywide transportation system development charges per our county ordinance. So we'll start with the housekeeping changes. You're going to find those on attachment 1 of your packet. There were a number of instances where work groups wanted to update the fee descriptions and even reorganize the fee table. And when I reached out to County Council, she suggested the best way to do that is really to get those changes in front of you as a group. While we were going through and making those changes, we also noticed that there were some outdated references to the authorizing legislation. And so we wanted to go through and provide the cleanup for that as well. So that's really what attachment 1 covers in totality. The proposed new and revised fees are shown on attachment 2. Attachment 4 provides a 10-year history of modifications just to the fees that were
proposing to revise this year. So it doesn't give you our entire 10-year history of the whole DTD fee table, but we've pulled out those fees that we're proposing a change to, and we've kind of shown you how they've modified over time. We're going to come back and talk about attachment 3 later in the session, so I'm not going to go into that one now. But for the new and revised fees that are shown on attachment 2, in some cases like copies, records research, credit card service fees, we just noticed that a number of our work group fees were inconsistent, and we wanted to propose to standardize those fees across DTD so that it didn't matter which of our work groups you were working with, you were going to come across the same fee. DTD implemented job costing back in 2012. Our staff work tirelessly to track time against permits through our time card system, and generally they do a really great job, but it requires ongoing training and diligent monitoring. As management has turned over in DTD, our new managers have renewed their commitment to this effort and are carefully reviewing time cards before approval to double check entries. We are also working to transition our reporting to rely on data from the permitting system to simplify those employee entries, and we're boosting consistent department-wide compliance with making sure that information gets in the time card system, because it does take a fair amount of time and our staff is really good about it, but just refreshing the need for it. What we do is we review these costs from the time card system against current application fees, and we use that information to improve the process recovery of our permits within our programs. So we're still providing you with all of the job cost comparisons where they're available. What you'll see if you're looking at that attachment number 2 is that over on the right, we've told you that through job costing, that permit costs X amount to process, and we provided a count of how many permits we actually showed in job costs that make up that number. So you know, was this just a single permit, or you know, maybe there were 37 permits that make up that average, just to give a little bit more baseline to it. But we have chosen to double check that job costing number with a different lens to confirm the permit cost recovery for engineering and for land use planning this year. So the engineering development review group, the baseline for their engineering permits considers the time we estimate is spent processing the permit in the office, as well as the minimum amount of time we would expect an engineering technician to spend working on that permit, both in the office and in the field, during the approval of the work being performed. For land use planning, this is really where a bulk of our proposed changes come into play. We organize the land use applications based on the required review process, and then we use that to establish a baseline estimate of time spent on applications in each of those different categories. And we outlined that for you in the BCC packet, so you could understand kind of what assumptions we made. We found, obviously, we were aware that more complex or contentious applications would require more planner time, and we reflected that in some of the fees that are proposed to be slightly higher than the calculated baseline for that type of application. I think mining permits might be a good example of where something like that might happen. You'll also notice in attachment number 2 that there are some land use fees highlighted in blue. These fees that are highlighted in blue historically have been subsidized based on decisions by prior boards. So you'll see that the adopted fee that we have in place for those is actually quite a bit lower than what it actually costs us to process them. This is typically the historic landmark, farmers markets, temporary structure, that type of permit. And we've presented a fee that would reflect the staff effort required to actually process these applications. But we just wanted you to be aware of that decision that had been made in the past, and it would need to be a decision to carry that forward again, obviously, if you wanted to do so. So the land use planning program receives general fund support to help subsidize the public service function. Many of the citizen inquiries that we receive and we respond to are not related to, and most don't result in a formal land use application, which makes full programmatic cost recovery through land use application fees really challenging. And just as an example, between July 2018 and June of 2019, more than 20,000 customers came into the public service lobby or called our planning phone line with basic land use inquiries. During the same time, we only took in 514 formal land use applications, which tells us that only 25% of those total interactions resulted in a formal application. Because of that public service function, the program only averages about a 26% programmatic cost recovery through licenses, permits, and charges for services. Due to the fluctuation in permit activity and the types of permits, it's difficult to give an exact percentage, but we do estimate with the proposed adjustments in attachment 2 that we would be able to achieve between 46 to 52% programmatic cost recovery for this group. Washington County, as a comparison, is able to achieve just under 60% programmatic cost recovery for their land use planning program, using their licenses, permits, and charges for services. But what you'll see from the fee comparisons is that Washington County permit fees are noticeably higher than even our proposed increases, because you'll see we provided both. We gave you our job cost comparisons, and we also looked at other comparable agencies so you could see where our fees would fall. If the board's goal is to achieve a greater cost recovery at the permit level, then it seems that at a minimum we should propose to increase all fees to the applicable baseline. In addition to the engineering and land use planning fees, we also have some minor adjustments proposed for plumbing, septic and on-site wastewater, and dog services fees. The annual adjustments for the transportation system development charges are on attachment 3, and the proposed modifications would accomplish 2 different things. The first is the annual consumer price index adjustment, which is calculating at less than 1% for this upcoming year. And the second would be to add the new rates to the table to accommodate the proposed tiered residential TSDC rate. And those changes would only go into effect if the tiered rates are approved by this board on May 7th, when I come back to the business meeting with that presentation. So in the packet before you today, we presented 3 different options. Option 1, approve the proposed fees effective July 1, 2020, recognizing that this is still providing a general fund subsidy for public service. Option 2, approve the proposed fees effective January 1st, 2021, recognizing that this still provides a general fund subsidy for public service, or provide further direction to DTD regarding the proposed fees. While we originally recommended approval of option 1 due to the general fund cuts the land use planning program experienced, in light of the issues the development community is dealing with due to COVID-19, we would recommend option 2, delaying the implementation of these changes until January 1st, 2021. So with that, do you have any questions for myself or Dan? It looks like Dan has something.
Hey, Diedre, just one point of clarification. I think you said 25%. When we were talking about the number of interactions that result in permits, I want to be clear. During that time frame from January 2018 to June 2019, we got 20,000 customers who requested information. That only resulted in 514 formal land use applications, which is 2.5%. Not 25%. So
yeah,
hopefully I said 2.5.
No.
Oh,
yeah.
Dang it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Humbertson and then Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I had a question on under, was it attachment 2, right-of-way permits, bike, run, walk, parade, and race events with traffic control. Your price going from $95 to $300. Washington County has $118 on that. You said the average cost to process is $44. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
So I was going to take a look here. The average cost to process that you're looking at there is from our DTD job cost data. And so we had just 2 different permits that are coming up with that average of $44. The $300 that you're seeing as our estimate was when our engineering development review supervisor went through and really took the time to say that, for example, for permit application processing, that'll take a half hour of a permit specialist and this is their rate. To do plan review coordination and research, so they listed out like what activities would take place along with that permit and how much time, what staff person, what is that rate, and tried to really calculate out. Because what we were finding is, and this is why we've had to have that renewed sense of urgency and attention to our job costing through workforce is that we have had this transition of managers over the last few years. And we just need to, we wanted to ensure that we were comfortable with the data coming out of job cost really seemed like it aligned with what we know it takes our staff to process these applications.
Okay, so then why do you think there's a difference of almost 3 times as much compared to Washington County?
That's an excellent question that I would have to, you'd have to go back to Washington County to ask them about their process on that particular one and find out, you know, they could have different staff involved in reviewing it. They might have, they might subsidize it quite a bit from their road fund. You find that a lot. You find that with all different application fees, which is why it's really hard to have that comparison with other jurisdictions. I mean, it works out in some cases, but other cases you might find that Deschutes County, you know, does or doesn't subsidize with general fund, or Washington County is the same thing.
Okay, so it could be just an issue of a subsidy from another source paying for it in a different way.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Paul next, right?
Yeah, my question was along the lines of when you mentioned the inquiries and 25% of those being
2.5.
2.5. Okay. My question is that do you monitor those to see if they're unique callers versus repetitive callers or inquiries?
We don't monitor it to that level. I think that you can ask our staff and you'll find that occasionally you'll have a similar phone call on maybe the same property, or somebody will follow up for additional information. Maybe they called and spoke with somebody at the counter, and after reading through the paperwork, they have more questions. But we don't necessarily get to the level of detail to say, you know, has Diedre Landon called multiple times about her property and building this particular deck?
And expand on that briefly, Commissioner. I mean, so take a simple real estate transaction where you may have a due diligence period on a residential use. We may get 15 inquiries from 15 real estate agents on that particular property. And none of that work would result in a permit per se.
Yeah. I mean, I look at, when I look back at my business operations, it's something that I even had to consider often is that where do I want to get cost recovery? Do I want to get cost recovery for every phone call that came in the building? Or do I want to get cost recovery for my professional staff who deliver the services directly when that job became, you know, had a job number and it came through and it was processed? So I had to realize that I couldn't get cost recovery on every aspect of my business. And sometimes there was things that were embedded in what I considered the cost of doing business, right? Mm-hmm. That there was and some of that was really unrecoverable. Mm-hmm. And you can't charge everything for everything, but somehow your total admin has to be embedded in almost everything you do. So with that said, is this everything you do?
No.
Okay.
When you
all right,
clarify that for one point, just make sure we're on the same page.
Well, so you have development fees, and you got, you know, land use related, and you got transportation fees. So you've got other operations, you know. So do you have other operations that when the phone rings that are directed elsewhere to other aspects of your business operation? I mean, when the phone rings, is it land use or transportation? That's it? Or are there other things that the phone rings that are inquiries that get directed elsewhere?
Those direct inquiries are associated with development specific, if that makes sense. And so when you look at a collection of data, and it's hard unless you break it down like on a programmatic aspect of our work. Because if you think about it, we've got, one of our biggest groups is transportation maintenance. And also the second biggest group is probably that permitting and land use group. And instead of breaking that down into very unique programs, we've kind of rolled that up. You know, those, I don't know, Diedre, that specifics on that 20,000?
It's just land use planning, phone room, and front counter.
Perfect.
Yeah, because it's like 330,000 interactions for our whole land use and development line of business.
Okay.
And so those figures, I wanted to make sure were really specific to this program we were talking about.
All right. And so the practical side of this is that, you know, 'cause some of these fees are pretty significant increases. I mean, some of them are just really significant increases. My question is that everything was couched if the board or the BCC wants 100% cost recovery. So is that in the essence that if we want full cost recovery, what about the general fund revenues that are being expended currently? What happens to those? Are those going to be, if those are all now paid for, are those going to be redirected back to us, or where do those dollars go?
So Diedre, expand on this if I missed something, but essentially right now, next year's budget will incorporate the cuts that are coming forward, and there will be general fund cuts within that program that are proposed, and Gary shared all that with us, and we're going to incorporate that. Right now, there's about a 50-50. If we put these fees forward and these fees collect the revenue we hope they will collect, which is a complete unknown, especially in the future as we go forward, we're assuming it's about a 50-50 split between general fund dollars and the fee cost recovery. If there is a surplus within that, based off Gary's new assumptions, that will then trickle back into the general fund, if there's general fund remaining.
Okay, so if we use 2010 as one baseline where the economy was still tanked and struggling, right? And we were starting to see a small trickle in compared to where it was pre-COVID. What does this generate on the positive side pre-COVID in a hot economy? And what does it look like in a 2010 environment? As far as money generation, I mean, what does this amount to?
So Diedre, I think you hit up on that topic on how it changes our cost recovery component
For the program.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we're estimating is that right now the program's getting about 26% programmatic cost recovery under our current rates, and that we're hopeful that with these changes, if they go into effect, we would be able to achieve between 46 to 52% programmatic cost recovery. So we're thinking that these are cost recovery on the permits themselves, but it'll get us a lot closer to programmatic cost recovery than where we are right now. I mean, just looking at the budget, so we had about $2 million of general fund support for 1920, fiscal year 1920, coming into this land use permitting program, land use planning. That went down to 1.5 million for our upcoming budget, which is completely understandable. So one of the things we were looking at is there an opportunity to use some fee increases to help maybe cover some of that gap that's no longer there, because that revenue, some of that revenue already has been redirected to other areas of the county that are in need.
So,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So instead of percentages, dollars, you just give me dollars, estimated dollars generated.
I don't
No
have that
idea
in front of me.
I mean, I will tell you that, and Gary shared this with you last week. Our staff has done an admirable job, if not simply amazing, in getting the permitting software or getting the online permitting up and running in 7 days. And we are continuing to see permit volumes that are steady and good. Is that going to last? I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. 2010, it's a different set of circumstances. I mean, who knows what's going to happen when we come out of this in a strategic, thoughtful, healthy way, and how long is that going to take? I know that we are issuing permits, and I know that we're accepting new permits, and we're going to have to track that and monitor that. I also will tell you that, you know, that discussion that you're having right now about the revenue and what happens to the general fund and all that is probably, in all honesty, going to be a dialogue that we're going to be having September, October, July, September, October, when we get a better idea about what this post-COVID situation looks like and what kind of permit volumes you're looking at. And we are planning for that. We are having talks internally within DTD about how we coordinate that and if cuts have got to be made.
The one thing I will say, I mean, that we've got our two options out there for the possible dates this could, you know, that you could decide to make it go live or implement it if you choose to accept our proposal. If it were to go live in July, then by the time we're preparing budget development for next fiscal year, which usually starts in about January, you'd have about 6 months under your belt of a comparison for what those increases did to the revenues, and you'd be able to do that comparison a little bit easier. If we do wait until January, then we still wouldn't have a great handle on exactly what the difference is between the revenues collected under the existing rates versus the new.
All right, well, it's 3 o'clock. Any other questions? What do we want to do?
Commissioner Fisher has a question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Fisher.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate all the detail in this, and especially the blue section, which is so easy to find and look at with regarding the decisions of previous boards. And I know you did a pretty good job going through all of this, but I'm just curious, who would be paying the fees? Like for the farmer's market, would it be the individual farmer that wants to set up shop, and for the historical landmark, all of those fees, what type of application, who would be paying those?
Well, fundamentally, it depends on whoever the applicant may be. So if it's a farmer's market, if it's a home base, or if it's a farmer's market at an individual farmer's location, that individual will be paying that fee in its totality. It depends on whoever is looking for the entitlement for that particular property, which increases the value and the land use elements they can complete on that particular property.
So it's the whole farmer's market or the individual booths?
If you came forward, let's play it out. So if you had a discussion on a farmer's market that you were going to have a variety of tenants at, so booths at, it would be one fee from the individual or the group that was looking to develop the farmer's market. It wouldn't be for an individual booth.
Okay, and then what about the historical, all those historical landmark
That's the individual property owner.
that wants to have a historical landmark?
That is
Okay, then
correct.
my last question is, since we've had this wonderful opportunity of COVID, of doing things online and increasing some efficiencies, have we looked at possibly it costing less to process some of these things because of using different types of technologies that we might want to utilize?
We are hoping that is the case. I can't tell you that we are more efficient now. We are struggling, not struggling, that's not the right word. They are doing yeoman's work and trying to get those permits done remotely, and it will get better. We have some new technology coming on board here in the next 3 to 6 months that will help not only our applicants, but help our staff move more efficiently through that process. I will also tell you, though, that we are looking at other ways to save money. I mean, I think that we're going to enter kind of a new world after this post-COVID discussion, and that new world is around telecommuting. That new world is around less office space that we have to rent. That new world is around shared desk space. Those are all things that DTD admin team is kind of discussing right now about, let's get our plans developed on how we get our folks back to work. That's priority number one. But then secondly is, in the next couple months, what does that future look like? And that future will probably hopefully cut some costs.
All right, any other questions? So what do you want to do? I think we should wait till the end of the year, January. Wasn't
That
that
would be
one of the options?
Option 2?
Yeah. I just think that we're coming out of a tough time, and
Well, and what about us looking through the blue section to see if any of the prior boards have looked at subsidizing these things because they provide a public good? Should we look at those to see if that's things we want to continue?
well, we have had that discussion over the years. It is a public good, and we are only charging a percentage of what time is really spent on this issue. But we also just previously agreed to move forward in full cost recovery. So seems rather strange to not do that. Just agreeing to it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the fees for historic are really a lot. It's $1,195, and that would definitely disincentivize anybody from doing that. So we just need to think, if this is something that we want, then maybe we have to up some of the other fees to subsidize the costs of the things we want to promote. And
Well,
I'm not advocating anything because I wasn't part of these previous board decisions. I'm just bringing it up.
I think we also agreed in that full cost recovery that it could be a decision that the commission could make, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so in a situation like, let's say the Baker house, what's that called? Driven by it 50,000 times. Baker cabin place, they want to do something there. It might be, and they're struggling, a nonprofit in that situation, the commission might step in and do something.
Okay, Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back to my last question. And I know you don't have the answer, but it might even help Commissioner Fisher's inquiry to some degree. For example, if you were to take every one of these fees and say, we know we get 3 of these and we get 1 of those and we get 50 of those, and then you could monetize the gain, right? You could say that that's what the total amount of the implementing a full cost recovery amounts to. And let's just say it generates $3 million, but 1 or 2 of those items in blue, for example, don't really generate that much. Maybe that's from a historic public service standpoint, maybe that's something worth pulling off that cost recovery model, knowing that there's only 1 or 2 of those versus there's 50 of these, and that's really a labor intensive and it's a frequent thing. But I just think that while I like the idea of implementing it later, I'm reluctant to know really what the gain here is and the frequency of these things and the staff applied to those. So I don't have any sense of scale right now. I understand the scale of this going to go from this much to this much, but I don't know really what we're gaining.
So Commissioner, and correct me if I'm wrong, Diedre, but theoretically, if we start it in, well, 2 things. One, you're with the fee proposal based off our estimated number of fees, and that was pre-COVID. We are estimating an increase in the fee recovery that we shared with you before. And Diedre, I'm not sure if there's an exact number to that you can share.
Like the percentage of
No,
permit cost recovery?
the
dollars,
the projected revenue.
Oh.
Work on that for 1 second. See if you can find something.
Just for the land use applications themselves?
Yeah, just do land use. Yeah.
Okay.
Where this kind of applies a little bit, where I struggle is that the whole SDC discussion on transportation, TSDCs, right? So it seems to me that it may not really be consistent to, if our goal was in one hand to subsidize or help incentivize building micro homes or based on that square footage model, it kind of gets back to that whole issue of, if it's really about cost recovery, it ought to be a cost recovery across the board.
Well, it is a cost recovery across the board. Agreed. I mean, that was the direction that we got. I mean, that's the best available information that we have, and that's our estimated cost. And the dialogue was pretty clear from the board: recover your costs. Now, this is a great discussion to have because it's a policy dialogue around, are there certain things that you want to subsidize? And there may be, and that's direction the board will have to give us.
Yeah, I'm just asking how much cost are we going to recover? Give me the dollar amount.
Well,
I think I hear what you're asking. I'll let you go first.
Do you have the number, Diedre, on the estimate?
I think so, but I was
Okay.
just going to tell you what I did and make sure that this sounds right. So if we were getting $775,000 a year, currently is what our year-end estimate is for all of our land use application fees. And if we go back and take the average increase to, like the average increase to the land use applications and apply that to this number, how much would we be getting then? Is that what you were? So that would take us from 775,000 to 1.37 million.
But the disclaimer that I'll share is the fact that that's an average number. And we still have to wait and see how this post-COVID environment looks like in regards to permitting authority. So, or
And
permitting
it's
activity.
also based off the types and frequency of land use applications we've gotten the first 9 months of this year, and it fluctuates all the time based on what people want to do with their land over a certain period of time. So
Yeah, but getting back to Commissioner Fisher's raising the issue of the historic districts and so forth, that's a sensitive spot for me. And if there's only 1 or 2 of those a year, it's not a big loss. You know, so I'm just kind of really worried about the volume in that regard versus the volume in others. And if using the averages, you know, you get the numbers. But if this is the exercise, and I'm hearing a gain of what, 600,000, maybe 700,000, Diedre, just right?
Yeah.
And that's just land use. So we haven't talked about the transportation element side, right?
right, we really delved into the land use because that's where the general fund was subsidizing it. So we focused on that primarily for this conversation.
All right, we need to make a decision here. What do you want to do?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve option 2 at this time. That doesn't preclude us from coming back to looking at the historical district concept and see if there's something that we want to do with that differently as an individual one, or taking those when somebody comes in and makes an application, and if we really think there's a need, we can waive a fee. We always have that authority from what I understood in the conversation.
Yeah, I'll second that. And any further discussion? All right, let's poll.
All right, Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
I don't like being put in the position of trying to go back and give someone a break. I think we got to be doing it now. I'm going to vote no.
Okay. Commissioner Fisher.
So I think the motion's confusing, but I would vote aye if we specifically are agreeing to relook at the policy of all of the historical, as Ken stated. I think that's really important for us to look at that.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that too.
So before January, we will look at that historic issue.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Richardson.
Aye.
Chair Bernard.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, there's not a lot we can do for the historical societies in terms of giving them straight up money and whatnot like that, but maybe the little that we can do at some point in time is figure out how to make it a little easier for them in terms of the permit end of things. And I'll just throw that on the table for that future discussion.
Well, we don't do that much.
My guess is there's very few of those applications.
Very few.
Yeah.
Very few. If 1 or 2 a year, maybe.
Yep.
I don't know.
You know,
All right.
We did have at one time a very strong program, and that has gone by the wayside. So what exactly this would affect, I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
But that program no longer exists. So.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Gary, what's up next?
Last is Commissioner Communications.
Who wants to start?
I have nothing.
Tanya?
Yeah, I think that we've done a lot of communicating today, so I'm good.
Paul? Okay, Martha?
I'm good.
I just want to say, thanks for the work at the food bank, and thanks for you guys who sat and did the community listening post, I believe it was.
Yep.
Also, Lynn Peterson showed up and helped us. She really enjoyed it. She's going to come every Monday. So we've recruited somebody to work at the filling boxes. So it's a great, satisfying opportunity. And the need is tremendous. On last Thursday, there were 250 cars, right?
Yeah.
At least, yes.
The line was out to the freeway. So we hope they organize it a little bit better. But thanks a lot for your hard work. It is hard work.
It's been fun to do.
All right, anybody else?
All right.
All right, well, with that, we're done for today.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you very much.
See you Thursday night.
All right.
All right.
Bye.